There is perhaps the idea that humanity can sometimes reach too far, or rather that it can obsessively follow down the path of arrogance and hubris to their own demise, unwilling to learn or accept the truth of their unobtainable ambitions. To borrow a line from Oliver Stone's mediocre Alexander the Great, delivered by the late great Christopher Plummer in the role of Aristotle, the East has a way of swallowing men and their dreams. This quote encapsulates the repeated failure of ancient and classical leaders to march east in search of glory and conquest, only to find ruination in some form for having tried it. This logic can be applied to Battletech as well, but in this case, or at least so it seems, it applies to 80-ton assault mechs with 400 engines. This is what has a tendency to swallow the designer's dreams. In this video, we're going to be looking at one of the clan's attempts to avoid this folly and acquire the long-held dream of such an 80-ton war machine. But their arrogance in believing that even they could, for all their technology, may indeed be a repetition of the very hubris that came before. In this video, we will be looking at Clan Wolf's Gargoyle. An assault mech weighing in at 80 tons, the Gargoyle appears to have begun its life as a solution to a lingering problem in Clan Wolf's Tumen in the latter portion of the Golden Century. One of their primary battlemechs, known as the Woodsman, had a series of flaws in its overall design, and performed poorly in competition with other clan mechs around the same tonnage. Machines such as the Summoner and Warhawk would either outmaneuver or outshoot these battlemechs, and inevitably left them on the wrong end of their trials again and again. This battlemech would be retired, but there was still a need to replace it in the line. Its roles would be broken between two mechs, namely, the legendary Timberwolf, which would inherit much of the original design's direct battle role, while making the mech faster in many respects, and by the Gargoyle, attempting to use some of the basic elements of its chassis, while removing the limitation of the Woodsman's speed, even with its mask. While the former of these two would go on to become one of the greatest war machines of all time, and arguably the most recognizable battlemech in the entire setting, only being in contention with the equally legendary Atlas assault mech. The latter, one of the original 16 clan Omnimechs, would have a very different fate. The Gargoyle is very rarely put into comparisons with the Mad Cat, or even with the long-lost Woodsman, first being referred to as a descendant from it in a blurb in Technical Readout 3055 under the Naga's profile, and its appearance giving some indication that it comes from this archaic design. For many, especially amongst players, they instead compare this clan assault mech to one of the most infamous designs of the Star League and Succession Wars era, that of the Charger. To be compared to such a battlemech is more than cruel in regards to speaking to its battlefield use. And it's not truly correct because the Gargoyle largely doesn't attempt to fill the role of a scout mech, which weighs 80 tons, meaning that its limitations were put in place for wholly other reasons than the Charger. In essence, when designed, the technicians and scientists wanted to have their cake and eat it too, and believed that advanced technologies would deliver the Gargoyle in a competitive state. This was, in truth, not the wisest belief. While there are configurations of the Gargoyle that are certainly a threat to enemy targets on the battlefield, it still often doesn't compare favorably with designs which are in the heavyweight bracket, which cost immensely less in terms of their material production costs to the clan, and can often do most of the Gargoyle's battlefield roles, but better. In terms of its in-game battle value, it may be more favorable to take in some instances for raw gameplay potential, but even then, often it will be outcompeted by lighter, and often more heavily gunned designs. To add to this, as an 80-ton skirmisher and striker, it has competition in the form of the Phoenix Hawk 2C, which is on average more mobile, and often, though not universally, more competently armed per configuration, despite its lack of use of Omnimech technologies. In Technical Readout Clan Invasion, Beneath its capabilities, it is written that the Man-O-War, the Inner Sphere name for the Gargoyle, is considered one of the deadliest assault-class battlemechs fielded by the clans during the invasion. I would simply respond with, how so? It has extremely limited pod space on board, meaning that its weapon systems are always desperate for some kind of coherent function, barring the use of extremely overtuned weapons like clan ERPPCs. Its armor is impressive by Inner Sphere standards, but this isn't that fearsome in comparison to its heavy mech counterparts, which often, as an add-on, outgun it. Clan battle doctrines all the way through to the Dark Age restrict the use of physical attacks, one of the greatest advantages of weighing such an immense amount of tonnage while being so fast. So simply put, unlike the Charger, renowned rightly or wrongly for its melee capabilities, the Gargoyle was restricted from using these attributes for most of its existence. While the Inner Sphere during this time might have had some cause for concern seeing the Gargoyle, it'd have still been a significantly reduced concern as compared to seeing a Summoner, or a Timberwolf, appearing on the field in opposition to them. They would dub it the Man-O-War as mentioned earlier during the invasion. The truth is, the Gargoyle is one of the rare examples of a clan mech where technology takes it far, but not across the finish line. There are examples of Inner Sphere Lost Tech designers trying to do similar things, such as with the Rakshasa, and the Gargoyle is built with the same kind of hubris. There is a reason it has earned the moniker the Clan Charger. It's worth noting many would compare the Gargoyle to the Executioner, but the Executioner, while needing to depend on its mask to achieve higher speeds, is more armored, and more heavily gunned, and benefits from the ability to jump 120 meters. And jump jets are an incredibly powerful tool in the tabletop game, especially when engaging in close quarters combat, or trying to get out of a bad situation in an area with difficult terrain features. The design would eventually be put into a condition where its future seemed uncertain, with Wolf abandoning their original occupied territories, along with taking most of their manufacturing assets. The shell of these factories, however, would fall into the hands of other clans, including that of Clan Hell's Horses, which would spend a decade refurbishing, rebuilding, and retooling these manufacturing sites. As of the Ilclan era, its home of manufacturing is with the clan which uses a combined arms doctrine, as well as the Mongol doctrine, it would seem. While it is uncertain if the moved equipment from the Clan Wolf migration was put back into use building gargoyles, they still have the mech readily available for deployment on account of them having built them in the Inner Sphere for over half a century, and will still have it at their disposal, at least for now. In the hands of the Hell's Horses, the Gargoyle is meant to be utilized in a cavalry role, and has replaced the production of some lighter mechs that might have otherwise filled this role. This is a perfect example as to why Clan Hell's Horses are routinely mocked for their tactical ineptitude, despite seemingly having the best on-paper approach to warfare amongst the clans. Replacing lighter, faster, and unironically more survivable due to their vastly superior movement, Battlemechs from the cavalry lineup is, in a word, foolish. The main advantage the Gargoyle can bring in supporting formations like this is its armored protection, which isn't necessarily going to contribute to its general survivability, and perhaps its ability to deliver elementals to the field, something the lighter mechs it replaced could also do. Moving at only the standard battle speed for most clan-heavy formations, and outgunned by almost all of its counterparts in that weight bracket, while being severely outgunned by its fellow assault mechs, it's not hard to imagine why the Gargoyle's reputation among players doesn't line up with the falsely fearsome reputation in universe. First produced in 2945, the 80-ton Battlemech known as the Gargoyle has seen extensive deployments throughout its time, and was in every attacking Tumen during the clan invasion. This assault mech does benefit from Omnimech technologies, meaning its pod systems can be changed over quickly between battles, but the machine itself has a much higher cost of replacement and maintenance. This makes it ideal for strong, elite strike groups, but less than ideal for potentially larger, attrition-based engagements, despite its ability to be changed on the fly. Every Omnimech lost is very difficult to replace, in essence. This means that the Gargoyle's basic components, like its armor, engine, internal structure, and other onboard attributes, won't change between configurations, but its weapons loadout and other specialized systems, which more or less fill up its pod space, can and will be changed between those configurations. For its onboard basic systems, it has a standard gyro, cockpit, and internal structure, not utilizing endosteel in order to try and keep more of its critical spaces on board, or in order to save on some of its enormous production costs. For its onboard electronic components, its communications are run by a system Ralderon R1, which is installed on board, and its targeting and tracking are run by its Varison Kappa 4 TTS system. The latter may have some role in its advanced rules quirk. The Gargoyle benefits from a rule called Stabilized, which impacts its right and left arms in this case. This means when firing its arm-mounted weapons, which are almost universally its only placement for weapons between configurations, it can run and fire these weapons at a reduced penalty, which is useful for a skirmisher and cavalry-based design. This quirk only applies when playing with the advanced rules, though. The place that receives the greatest investment of resources in the entirety of the Battlemech is in the realm of mobility. Despite weighing 80 tons, this assault mech was built to move at the same speed of the clan heavy mechs near its own tonnage. In Battletech's system, however, engines can only get so big, and they get proportionately bigger the larger the mech gets. So, for instance, the Timberwolf's 375 XL engine weighs 19.5 tons, but the Gargoyle's enormous Model SF3 400 XL engine, which it needs for it to travel at the same speed as the Timberwolf, is 26.5 tons. This means that just to move at the same speed, the Gargoyle must pay an additional 7 tons, when it is only 5 tons heavier than the Timberwolf. Worse, it also means that it spends more inherently on its internal structure weight, and unlike the Timberwolf, it does not utilize endosteel, meaning that it has an even greater tonnage debt, despite being a heavier mech. All the same, this gargantuan engine, the largest in the entire game for the purposes of standard battlemechs, gives the Gargoyle the ability to run at the same speed as the Charger, which is 86 km per hour, or 8 movement points in the tabletop game. While in the Inner Sphere this is a truly impressive speed for such a heavy mech, even there it is largely understood that this speed can only be achieved through sacrificing much. And the Gargoyle does do that, despite its advanced clan technologies. All the same, it does mean it can keep up with the faster pace of clan battle formations on a strategic level, and it does mean that the Gargoyle can overmatch its peer adversaries in the Inner Sphere in regards to movement. Many clan battlemechs invest minimally in heatsinks out of the gate in order to save on tonnage for pod space within the battlemech. Because heatsinks can be added with Omnipod technologies, this means that these Omnimechs often fill out a few of their available engine critical spaces, and then add heatsinks to the overall structure as needed per configuration. While the Gargoyle is no different, it does invest significantly out the gate in heatsinks, installing a total of 6 tons of additional double heatsinks on board into its base frame, which are all occupied within its aforementioned gigantic 400 XL engine. This means that it inherently has 16 clan double heatsinks, and this allows it to be cooled by 32 every turn. This also means that the Gargoyle tends to work fairly well with energy builds on board, and its best configurations are often dependent on making good use of this volume of cooling equipment. But at the same time, this is still a net detractor from its available tonnage that can be used for onboard systems. For an assault mech in the Inner Sphere weighing 80 tons, the Gargoyle would have a solid foundation of tonnage contributed to its own physical defense, namely 11 tons of clan ferrofibrous plating. This volume of protection amounts to 211 points of armor overall. This is by no means inadequate, but again, it does not exist in a vacuum and can be compared to other designs. The Timberwolf has more plating of the same quality, despite weighing less. For comparison with another Clan 80-ton assault mech, the Warhammer 2C has more plating, despite moving slower but having nearly the same weight put into its standard fusion engine, making it more durable in armor and survivable to incoming fire due to occupying less critical spaces with XL engine points. In essence, this is an average amount of protection for a clan mech in this weight bracket, and it isn't exceptional, despite being relatively high by Inner Sphere standards for its weight and speed. At last, we get to the one space that seems to dictate the most about the Gargoyle, that which makes or breaks an Omnimech inevitably, whether it be by the Inner Sphere or by the clans in its origins. It is the greatest single contributor to success or failure when factoring in all other elements when trying to decide the role of such a mech. The Gargoyle has 21.5 tons of available pod space. It moves at the same speed as every other clan-heavy Omnimech that was first documented in Technical Readout 3050. It has less armor than its closest comparable design, which is another descendant of the Woodsman. In fact, it has less pod space than every single clan, heavy, or assault mech from this era. The Charger was about speed. Even the later generation variants of it which use XL engine technologies to make it viable. It's an 80-ton mech which goes fast, which is a novelty, in a way, and something which outruns, in terms of raw speed, most of its peers. The Gargoyle, unfortunately for it, cannot make the same claims as the Charger. The Gargoyle is outmaneuvered by the jumping 80-ton Phoenix Hawk 2C. And this non-Omnimech also has 5 more tons worth of weaponry on board. So one cannot even say it is unique in the clan 80-ton range, nor even the best competitor here, outside of its use of Omnipod space, at least by the time of the clan invasion. The Mad Dog, Hellbringer, Summoner, and Timberwolf all move at the same speed, and carry more firepower, sometimes immensely more firepower. While it does out-armor 3 of these, it's also a heavier mech, and unfortunately one with the single most resource-intense engines ever built to go into the Battlemech itself. Meaning that even for the clans, which don't have a money system in the same way as the Inner Sphere, it materially costs much more than the heavy mechs mentioned, and it is outgunned by them. All of them. It is not a useless element on the battlefield. It definitely has its virtues when it shows up, and its battle value is comparatively lower than some of these mechs in some of its various configurations, making it potentially desirable under the right conditions to deploy them. But as a machine, in-universe, as an assault mech, when compared to almost all of its peers, at least in my opinion, the Gargoyle is perhaps among the least capable clan Omnimechs ever built. While I am a big fan of the interesting but flawed Executioner, the Gargoyle doesn't gain the same affection from me, if only because it is only 5 tons heavier than a Timberwolf, and is flatly inferior to it and realistically speaking, costs more in terms of its material value to build. There are 16 configurations of the Gargoyle as of the making of this video. Some offer a good return on tonnage, relatively, and some offer a less good return on that. I will be covering 5 of them in this video. Perhaps one of the most derided battlemechs of its era, the Gargoyle Prime is both a tragedy and in some ways a workable design, even if an inefficient one. Like most Gargoyle configurations, it deploys the overwhelming majority of its weapons into its arms, though this isn't why it is an issue. The Prime is armed with an anemic arsenal of weaponry for its tonnage, and is almost wholly ammunition dependent. To start with, it comes with a pair of LB5X autocannons, with 1 in each arm and 1 ton of ammunition per cannon. These are backed up with 2 standard short-range missile launchers with 6 tubes each, with again 1 ton of ammunition, each, and with one placed in each arm. Then it has a center torso mounted ER small laser. This is frankly abysmal for its tonnage and its cost of production, which is approximately valued at 26 million C-bills as compared to the approximate 24 million C-bills for the Timberwolf Prime, which outperforms it in almost every meaningful way. The LB5Xs have fantastic range, but are limited to 5 damage per attack when using solid ammunition. If using cluster ammunition, these hit with the damage reliability of an LRM-5, but do greater scatter damage. Its SRM-6s are fantastic weapons, but unreliable damage delivery systems as well. In essence, this means that the Gargoyle is going to be running and gunning every turn, but may not deliver reasonable damage, and instead is basically a crit fishing machine, just one which is surpassed again by its colleague machines, like the Mad Dog A, which does the same job, but dramatically better. This means that the Gargoyle Prime, while not useless on the battlefield, just struggles to match any other mech in the same role that it's meant to do. With a very low battle value for a mech with this much armor amongst clan mechs, however, it does find value trying to emulate the Mad Dog A, while having more armor and dragging as many elementals as it can around the battlefield, essentially becoming a 1500 battle value taxi for that unit type. The most expensive configuration, at least regarding its battle value, the A configuration, is an interesting design, and certainly has some potential as a battlemech. While yes, it can be outcompeted by other battlemechs with similar movement, it doesn't mean that this dangerous hole puncher and head clipper shouldn't be respected, especially given its speed and durability. To start with, and to be clear, it is a laser boat design, focusing mostly on its pair of extremely high damage and lethal clan ER PPCs. This is truthfully what the mech is built around, more than any other system. It runs at its maximum speed, trying to exploit its stabilization quirk if playing in the advanced rules, and launches devastating ER PPC blasts at short, medium, or long range depending on its opposition forces. Should combat come closer and it needs to diversify its fire, there's an assembly of alternate energy weapons, namely a large pulse laser, a medium pulse laser, as well as an ER medium laser and ER small laser. All of these weapons are mounted into the arms, with all the lasers being mounted in the left arm and all the PPCs in the right. This does mean that should it lose one of these two limbs, its firepower isn't halved, but instead its firepower is fundamentally changed and locked into one bracket. Still, it is a durable mech, and with no ammunition on board, this running and gunning long-range hole puncher and head clipper could be something to be seen. The only problem is it might be outcompeted by other designs which again, do similar things, but without the same problems or limitations of arm-mounted weapons. Like the Timberwolf D, which despite having SRM ammunition on board, is approximately the same battle value for a much more dangerous machine which can perform very much the same role, and others. A fan favorite, the C configuration leans into the Gargoyle's durability and speed, and attempts to turn it into a close-range brutalizer. Despite having ammunition dependencies, this is largely what it achieves, and it is a major threat to anyone on the battlefield, if only because of its primary weapon system. Armed with a left-arm mounted Ultra AC-20 autocannon, this can shatter light mechs, and maim heavy and assault mechs with one well-placed strike. Unfortunately, this terrifying and devastating heavy weapon only has 10 rounds of ammunition on board, or enough for 5 turns of rapid fire, which is where it delivers its most horrendous blows. Backing this up is 6 clan ER medium lasers, some of the most reliable damage delivery systems in the game. Medium laser span is always a reliable and powerful option for any mech with limited tonnage. As with other Gargoyles though, the C is still wholly dependent on its arm-mounted weapons, and should it lose an arm, it will rapidly be degraded, especially if it is the arm with the medium lasers, because all of those lasers are in one arm and the AC-20 is in the other. Beyond this, it has 3 A-pods to kill infantry foolish enough to approach it. The C is a serviceable configuration, and mostly does something many of its immediate counterparts don't do, barring mechs like the Summoner C. This is a go-to gargoyle for many players, which want to use it in duels, or in high-intensity battles. Perhaps one of the most awkward configurations is the M configuration, which appears around the era of the Blakest assault on the Inner Sphere. It comes armed with the clan's latest technology in the form of a Hag-20 with 18 rounds of ammunition. This right arm mounted cannon is very impressive, especially when coupled with its left arm mounted ER-PPC. For torso weapons, it backs this all up with 3 SRM2s, which is not all that helpful in my estimation, even if converted to Infernos. The real problem for the M is that, again, it has 1 weapon per arm. Though the M does have the range to act as a sniper and harasser, its ability to do this is not infinite, but it is still a viable battlefield role all the same. Again, one problem it has is that there are just other clan mechs that can deliver similar or superior firepower in a similar role, which weigh less than this machine. The most interesting variant of the Gargoyle, and one being built by Clan Hell's horses, is Configuration K, which is a wild departure from what has come before, simply because during the Dark Age and Ilclan era, the clans abandoned their reluctance to use melee as a valid form of combat. The K configuration represents this, and brings with it a horrifying adaptation, leaning into its plating, speed, and weight by giving the Gargoyle a hatchet. This means that it can close in and start swinging with its devastating, potentially head-clipping weapon, and can off-balance and overwhelm battlemechs of almost any weight and type. Backing this up are a series of dangerous adaptations. First, it has a supercharger, for when it needs to boost its speed in order to close with its enemies to use its very dangerous bludgeoning weapon. To go further, it has 3 torso-mounted Streak SRM4 launchers with 25 rounds of ammunition, meant to exploit holes which may have been carved into the enemy, as well as to just blanket them with crit-seeking shotgun blasts, and to give it a non-arm-mounted backup weapon system. The ammunition is protected by a case too as well, making it more durable. Finally, it has 4 improved heavy-medium lasers in its offhand, giving it a horrifying punch in close, and allowing it to deal real, terrible damage to targets even without its hatchet. While there are other Dark Age and Ilclan era configurations, in my opinion the K is the most unique, and leans into the features that allow the Gargoyle to deliver impactful and dangerous strikes. It discards trying to do what other designs do. It doesn't try to be a poor man's Omnimech. It is a ruthless melee monster, running at extreme speeds and leaning into the Gargoyle's one unique feature, its weight, to give it an enormous advantage, especially when paired with its supercharger. Normally, the Gargoyle is a concern to see, but it is a very manageable concern. The K, and to a lesser extent the C, defy those expectations. The Gargoyle, for all its faults and limitations, is still a clan assault mech, even if it often plays the role of a limited heavy mech. Even if it is not as terrifying as a Timberwolf, or as devastating as a Mad Dog or Hellbringer in a raw firepower sense, it has virtues which it can deliver on any battlefield. When using one must remember to play into its strengths, especially when using its more unique configurations. But truth be told, in many cases, for most forces, it's frankly more optimal to just take a different machine altogether. But I must reiterate, just because a Mad Dog, Timberwolf Summoner, or even Phoenix Hawk 2C, and an abundance of others, may do its job better than itself, or may just be a better value to a force on a strategic or tactical level, does not mean that somehow the Gargoyle isn't going to decimate enemy forces if they truly underestimate it. It's almost always cool running, and its big guns will never tire, while it is fast enough to avoid some incoming fire, all while tanking anything but the most severe levels of responses from its enemies should they actually hit it. One may celebrate that they are not about to be annihilated by a cheaper, more competent design, but they might just be annihilated all the same, if the mech is underestimated. If it is not, then it is simply a managed risk on the battlefield for an enemy commander to mitigate, wear down, and remove, where the options to do those things would be more limited should the enemy have deployed more competent assets. Sadly, the moniker of the Clan Charger might just fit. It's perfect. It's awesome. Every day is just filled with just wins. All we do is put wins in the record books. We win so radically in our underwear before the first cup of coffee, it's scary. People say it's lonely at the top, but we sure like the view. Thank you for joining me here today. If you're looking to get the plastic gargoyle, they can be found in the Clan Heavy Striker Star, along with 4 other Clan Battlemechs. But on another note, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. I do updates very frequently, and you'll be happy with the content, I think. Also, a huge thank you to all the YouTube members for this channel, as usual. When you hit the join button and become a member, you take an extra step in supporting the content on this channel, and I can't thank you enough, because this content really is only possible because of viewers like you. And with that, I will see you all in the comment section below.